Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're looking at how two incredible short stories managed to capture the very soul of a nation at a crossroads.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Picture Korea in the 1920s. It's a country under colonial rule, and it's going through this massive, absolutely gut-wrenching transformation. I mean, the traditional society that had been in place for 500 years, it was just coming apart at the seams.
So how do you even begin to describe something that huge? Well, two brilliant authors, Jin-geon and Tae-jun, figured it out. They used the power of the short story to create these amazing literary snapshots, basically freezing in time all the anxiety and heartbreak of a society trapped between what it was and what it was becoming.
All right, first up, let's talk about Jin-geon's 1923 masterpiece, Grandmother's Death. This story is just this powerful, raw look at what happens when old, deeply held values smash head-on into the harsh realities of a new, modern world.
The whole thing kicks off with this really urgent message. You gotta remember, this isn't age before phones. A telegram wasn't like getting a text message, it was a huge, dramatic event. And this one yanks our narrator right out of his modern professional life and soul and sends him racing back to his family home out in the country.
So, at first, the narrator is just completely overwhelmed by this sense of duty and real sorrow. And this feeling, it perfectly captures the traditional value of filial piety, this sacred idea that it's your absolute duty to be with your elders, especially when they're passing. For centuries, that idea was the very bedrock of their society.
But here's the thing. The grandmother doesn't pass away immediately. She lingers, and as the days drag on, you can feel this sacred vigil just start to fall apart. That initial sorrow, it starts to curdle into impatience. The family members, who all have jobs and lives back in the city, start whispering about meetings and deadlines. You can feel the modern world literally pulling them away.
And this right here, this lays out the central conflict perfectly. You look at that tradition column, you see these ancient, powerful ethics like filial piety. But then you look over at modernity, and it's all about money, jobs, and your own personal schedule. It's a total clash. And you know what tips the scales? The family calls in a modern doctor who gives a medical opinion, says she has weeks to live. And that basically gives them the permission slip they need to choose modernity and get back to their lives.
And this is where the story becomes just devastatingly ironic. Armed with that doctor's prognosis, the entire family packs up and heads back to the city. And that very night, after they've all gone, the grandmother passes away, completely alone.
So you see, the crucial point here is that Hyun isn't just telling us a sad family story. No, he's basically performing a social autopsy. He's showing us that the core moral code that held Korean society together for hundreds of years, that idea of filial piety, it wasn't just fading away, it was already dead.
Okay, so now let's jump forward a little bit into the 1930s with a story by Tae-jun. This guy was so good he was actually called the Maupassant of Joseon. And in his story, A Moonlit Night, he changes the focus. It's not about the death of a whole system anymore, but about the quiet, personal tragedy of one man who just doesn't fit in.
So we meet our main character, Hwang through the narrator, who's just moved to the edge of Seoul. The area is still kind of rural, so you can still find characters like Soo-gyun. He's described as a Pyeon, a simple, maybe a little foolish guy, who in the old village system would have had a place. People would have known him and looked out for him.
Now, Hwang Soo-gyun's dreams are just heartbreakingly small. I mean, he's not trying to get rich or famous. He just wants a steady job delivering newspapers, to be a full carrier, not just an assistant. He's a kind soul, super talkative, and his heart is completely pure. But he's totally out of step with a world that's getting faster and frankly a lot colder.
And this just perfectly illustrates his tragedy. Every single time Hwang Soo-gyun tries to find a place for himself in this new society, it just blows up in his face. His friendly chatter is seen as annoying. His simplicity is seen as incompetence. Even when the narrator gives him money to start a melon stand, a rainstorm wipes it out. It's like his good intentions always lead to disaster. So after Soo-gyun loses the narrator's money, he feels so terrible about it that he tries to make it up to him by bringing a gift of grapes, which it turns out he stole. And of course, he gets caught. But, and this is such a key moment, the narrator doesn't see a criminal. He sees a man with a pure, affectionate heart who is driven to a desperate act. It's this incredible moment of empathy.
The story ends on this beautiful,
really haunting image. The narrator sees Soo-jin walking alone under a bright moon, a little drunk, singing this sad Japanese song over and over. But instead of calling out to him, the narrator hides. He gives Soo-jin the dignity of his own private sorrow. It's just this tiny, silent act of compassion for a man that the world has already forgotten.
So, okay, here we are 100 years later. Why do these stories, written about a world that's long gone, still feel so incredibly immediate, so powerful?
Well, it's because both of these authors, even with their different styles, Hyun Jin-geon being so sharp and ironic, and Tae-jun being so empathetic, they're basically diagnosing the same illness. Grandmother's Death shows a society that's losing its moral compass, its rules, and A Moonlit Night shows a society that's losing its heart, its ability to care for the vulnerable.
Yeah, they absolutely captured the specific feelings of 1920s Korea, but the questions they're asking, man, those are timeless. They saw that what we call progress always has a cost.
And that right there is the question that just echoes from their pages right into our world today. As our own lives change at this dizzying speed, these century-old stories are here to remind us to stop and ask ourselves, in our own relentless rush forward, what essential parts of our humanity are we leaving behind?
You know, if you want to understand how a nation can go through such a dramatic transformation, you could pick up a history book. Or you could unlock its story through 3 powerful works of literature, which is exactly what we're going to do today.
So how can it do that? How can a work of fiction really capture the soul of an entire era? Well, we're about to find out. We're going to take a journey through 3 pivotal decades in South Korean history, the 50s, 60s, and 70s, and see how these stories gave a voice to a nation grappling with war, explosive growth, and the very meaning of its own identity.
All right, let's start with Act 1, the 1950s, a time defined by the deep scar of war. Our first story is Hwang Soon-won's Sanagi, which translates to The Shower. And you have to remember, this was written in 1952, right in the absolute thick of the Korean War.
On the surface, it's this incredibly pure story about a fleeting first love between a country boy and a city girl. They're exploring fields and mountains together. It's all very innocent. But then, this idyllic little world is shattered by a sudden, intense rain shower, the sonagi, that forces them to huddle together for shelter in this tiny, fragile hut. That downpour, it has tragic consequences. The girl gets gravely ill from the soaking. The boy doesn't see her for days, until one night he overhears his parents talking. She's died, and these were her last words. It's an absolutely devastating personal story, but it symbolizes so much more. See, this isn't just a story about young love. That sudden, inescapable shower is an allegory for the Korean War itself, a national tragedy that just came out of nowhere, ended all innocence, and tore the country apart. Their beautiful fleeting connection, it mirrors this lost era of purity, completely washed away by the sudden violence of war.
Okay, let's jump forward to the 1960s. This was a decade of explosive, state-led industrialization. And with our next story, Kim Seung-ok's A Trip to Mujin, the theme shifts. It's no longer about a national trauma inflicted on people, but about an individual compromise made by choice.
Our main character has achieved what looks like success. He's married into wealth, but because of that, he feels this deep detachment from his own life. So he escapes the pressure of Seoul and goes back to his hometown, Mujin. And Mujin is perpetually covered in this thick fog, which is just the perfect metaphor for his own moral ambiguity, his desire to escape the sharp realities of his ambitions. And this is his conflict, right here. Seoul represents success, responsibility, ambition, but Mujin is all about escape, a search for authenticity, and living in that foggy ambiguity. While he's there, he meets a music teacher who represents this more artistic, authentic life he left behind. And he's just torn between the life he's built and this chance at maybe a truer version of himself.
So what does he do? Well, after a brief affair, a telegram arrives calling him back to his life in Seoul.
He actually writes the teacher a letter promising to take her with him, and then he tears it up. In that cold, calculated moment, he makes his choice. He consciously abandons his past and the woman who reminded him of it, all to go back to his life of compromised success. As his bus leaves Mujin and its fog behind, he's hit with one final realization. The story's last line is, "I felt a deep sense of shame." It's not pride, it's not relief. It is this crushing self-awareness of the true price of his choices. He knows exactly what he's given up. That feeling of individual loss leads us right into the 1970s. And our final story, Hwang Sok-young's The Road to Sampo. This one explores the collective consequences. What happens when 1,000,000 people make choices just like the one made back in Mujin? This story follows 3 totally marginalized people, the kind of people left behind by South Korea's rapid industrialization. We have Young Dal, a rootless construction worker, Jung Shi, an older man fresh out of prison, and Bae Kwa, a barmaid escaping her past. They're all just adrift in a country they don't recognize anymore, without a real home to go to. But on this really hard journey through the snow, these strangers form this brief but really powerful bond. They meet, they share what little food they have, they travel together. They essentially become a temporary family, offering each other a little warmth and human connection against the bitter cold of the world. Jang Si, the older man, he has one single hope that's kept him going all this time. He wants to return to his hometown, Sampo. In his mind, it's this beautiful, idyllic place he hasn't seen for a decade. It's not just a town for him, it's the dream of a simpler, more dignified life, a place where he can finally find some rest. And then comes the gut punch. At the train station, he asks an old man about Sampo, and the man tells him, "Sampo? It's all construction sites now, a tourist hotel." In that single, devastating moment, Jung-shi realizes his destination, his past, his entire dream, it's all been erased by the relentless march of progress. His home is gone. So after all that, why do these stories endure? What do these 3 acts really tell us when we look at them together as a single journey of a nation? You can see this clear, heartbreaking progression. In the 50s, with Sonagi, the loss is innocence, and it's caused by a tragedy that happens to you. In the 60s, with the trip to Mujin, the loss becomes authenticity, and it comes from a personal choice to sacrifice your soul for success. And by the 70s, with the road to Sampo, that choice becomes a collective reality. The loss is of home itself. The very idea of a place to return to has been paved over. Ultimately, what these stories show so powerfully is that all this rapid development didn't just reshape a landscape of buildings and roads, it reshaped the human heart. And really, these aren't just Korean stories. They explore these timeless dilemmas we all face. What do we sacrifice for progress? And what does it mean to stay human in a world that's changing so fast? And that leaves us with one final thought. When future generations look back at our time, what choices, what compromises, and what losses will our stories tell them about us?